Do you dread going to work because you work for an incompetent and bad boss? In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you, number one, the psychological root causes of why your bad boss is bad in the first place. Number two, how you can reframe the situation so that you can actually fall in love with the boss and enjoy going to work and thriving. And number three, what you need to do when you are triggered by your bad boss's behavior. Hi, I'm Emily Liu. I help you soar to greatness in leadership and in love. So you could be thinking, Emily, I think you're crazy. Fall in love with my bad boss? That person just makes me have sleepless nights. So please hear me out. This is Steve, who shows up as the typical bad boss, who micromanages, is self-centered and arrogant, doesn't listen, is controlling, doesn't show his emotions, is aloof, and angers easily. And here is why. We've all been wounded in some way, and that's the universal human experience. There's nothing shameful about talking about what happened to us in childhood because that made us who we are. And that drove many of us to overachieve and keep climbing the corporate ladder. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it's done for the wrong reasons, for external validation, that is when things can come crashing down. The statistics show that 2/3 of leaders fail. Yeah, they either get demoted or they get fired. And we have been addressing the problems at the surface level. We're not going deep into the iceberg. And if we don't break up the iceberg, the leadership is guaranteed to sink through demotion or getting fired. So I'm here to address the elephant in the room. And what is underneath the surface in the iceberg? Childhood demons. Steve was an athlete growing up. His father wanted him to become a world-class tennis player. And every time Steve didn't win a match, the father just criticized. It was never good enough. And Steve also had incidences at school where he did not feel enough. He was bullied. He felt ashamed for not measuring up. All of us have had experiences at home and at school that made us feel not enough. And these are the parts of us when we feel not enough, ashamed, not smart enough, I'm not worthy. These parts of us get frozen with those negative feelings, and it gets locked away into the back corners of our psyche, forever to be protected. The protective system gets into high gear, and these are the parts of us that take over and has us become perfectionists, to overachieve, to become controlling, all in the name of protecting these child parts of us. And this is what is happening to Steve. Because he never got the validation that he needed, the overachievement part drove him to succeed and climb the corporate ladder. Wanting to be controlling, wanting to be micromanaging, wanting to be self-centered, all a cry for validation. Because the little Steves that were never validated by mom or dad or the peers is trying to seek that external validation. And one of the ways that he could do it is, I'm never gonna be bullied ever again. So I'm gonna keep climbing so that I'm controlling other people. I make sure I manage up and I don't care what happens to my team. They just have to produce for me. He may have been told that he has some of these traits of a bad boss. So Steve may go to leadership training to try to correct some of these negative behaviors. And perhaps he is okay the first few weeks. He's all excited about what he learned. He's trying to implement it with his team, and his team is a little bit on edge. It's like, okay, he's a little bit different, but is this gonna last? And oftentimes what happens is in the long term, it does not last because these traditional above the surface behavioral tools, it's not gonna stick because the stuff that's underneath in the iceberg, the little Steves that have driven him have not been addressed. And he's not aware that this inner team of his of self-centeredness, arrogance, control, perfectionism, not listening, interrupting, these are all driven by the need for his validation. So if you look at this beautiful cartoon that illustrates how the protective parts take over the self. If you look at image number 3, the protectors have taken over when Steve is in a bad boss moment. A 5-year-old is leading the team when he is acting out. Yeah, we've all been guilty of situations where we have had these protective parts of us take over instead of having our highest self be the leader of our inner team. So this is lack of emotional intelligence and social intelligence because we didn't know that there is a highest self that is underneath the rubble of all of the scars that we're all carrying around us every single day because the past is always in the present. not only in leadership, but in love and in our health. So whatever results that we don't have is caused by the burdens of the past that are making us self-sabotage. And the whole goal is to get the self, the highest self, which we all have. And that's in image number 6, highest self, to be leading the inner team to greatness. When we are overtaken by our emotions, we have to step back, because the highest self is confident, courageous, calm, present, patient, playful, curious. So we have to get curious and step aside. Ask our judging and critical parts of us to step aside and let our highest self rule the show. So number 1, I just gave you the psychological deep root causes of why Steve is showing up with bad leadership traits. And number 2, the reframe that you need to have is Steve is being overtaken by his 5-year-old part when he is in his bad boss behaviors. And you have to feel sorry for him. Instead of being triggered by him and judging him and criticizing him, you ask these parts of you to step aside. So just like that cartoon showing the big protectors overtaking the psyche, when you are judging and criticizing Steve, that is your parts judging him. And the other thing is, because Steve is an authority figure, unconsciously he could be reminding you of mom or dad. So you get reactive and your nervous system gets all on high alert and is trying to protect you. So you start to judge and criticize or withdraw and get scared. So you gotta ask these parts of you that have overtaken you to step aside, to say, let's get curious and let's get calm. And when you approach Steve with calmness and curiosity, it will more than likely dial down his nervous system so that he could actually listen to you. Steve, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm experiencing interruptions every time I try to present an idea. I'm really curious about how I need to show up so that when I'm presenting my ideas that I don't get interrupted. And we all can't win if we're constantly interrupting each other. So can we work together to come up with a different solution so we can all hear each other's thoughts and ideas? So you see how that calmness can relax the 5-year-old. So just pretend that you are talking to a 5-year-old who is having a temper tantrum because he's not getting his needs met. He wants to be heard and he wants to be seen. And that's the reason why your boss is acting out. And if you have this psychological reframe that he is a 5-year-old that's running the show, and you be the bigger person and zoom out and get curious with him and work together, that's the solution to making a bad situation into a good one. And eventually you may be wondering, how is Steve ever going to get to a higher place? Well, usually when people keep going in this bad way, at some point he's either going to get fired or demoted, self-sabotage. And if it's not in leadership, other areas of his life are just going to come crashing down. It's just the way the laws of the universe work. And that's why so many people go through midlife crisis. Because if we don't address the demons of our past, it will show up where it's going to make us crash. And in order for Steve to actually become a better leader, he has to understand this whole internal family systems framework of self-leadership. That's why I'm sharing this knowledge with you, so that you could see the bad boss challenges from a really compassionate lens, so that you can understand the work that individuals, teams, and organizations really need to invest in order to have more engaged employees and to have amazing leaders. Because if we don't address the iceberg, we're going to continue to have 2/3 of leaders failing. And do we really want that? I don't think so. So I hope that you have gained some knowledge on why bad bosses show up in a bad way. When you understand the psychological principles, you could actually reframe your whole thinking about who your boss is and get to a better place so that you could actually fall in love with a bad boss, fall in love with that 5-year-old.